The topic of the day is going to be classify, all things classification related with Ocrolus. So it's a couple minutes after the hour, and I suppose we can get started. I am going to pull up a screen share in a little bit, maybe a couple of minutes, to walk through Encompass related things with how Ocrolus classifies documents in Encompass. But I do want to first talk about classification outside of Encompass, just general Ocrolus processing things. I do think it helps folks to know a little bit of the black box of what happens when Ocrolus is processing documents. And this can be for any of our clients that are using Encompass or anyone outside of Encompass as well. One of the first things to know is just when the timer starts, when we start processing documents. And I think it's important to know how your interaction with that may or may not be. So in Encompass, I'll show you actually when I pull up the screen share what that looks like. There's usually a folder that we monitor. Documents get placed in there, but Encompass does need to be saved for that starting line to begin for us to start pulling documents. Now, if you're using us in the dashboard, it's a little more explicitly clear if you're just accessing Ocrolus directly on our web app. You upload documents on your own, or maybe you have an IT team that's wired up documents to be sent to us directly. In those cases, our processing of documents begins upon receipt of them if you upload them or if they're wired up to be sent over automatically. So that's when the classification process starts. So what do we mean by classification? That's also a good thing to start with, I suppose. When Acrolus processes documents, generally speaking, there are two main phases of our processing of those documents. Now, there are many, many sub-phases. It's a big, crazy map when we process documents, but generally speaking, the first step is classifying the document. And that is, in other words, just figuring out what the heck this document is. So we get documents, and the first thing we have to do is figure out what is this? Is it a pay stub? Is it a statement one from a 1040, tax return document? Is it a state disclosure from Oklahoma? Is it something? Is it something else? We do have a defined list of documents that we support, which means that we don't just try our best at figuring out what a document is, and it could be anything out there. We have a defined list of documents that we support. So the first step is figuring out what is this document. That allows us to figure out what fields we will capture from that document, which is the second part of our process. We're not talking about that today. That's the full data capture part that drives our ability to power income calculations and conditions and all that additional stuff. But that first step is classifying the document. So once we're done classifying the document, there are a couple of things that we actually do grab, some data fields that we grab from the documents. And those do help us classify the document with a little layer of granularity. In Encompass, I'll show you what that leads to, but just note that generally speaking, Encompass will figure out what those documents are if you send us a whole application package of documents. That's the first thing that we do is figure out what they are. And that directly powers our ability to classify documents. Now, as this looks in Encompass, I do want to pull up this screen share to show that. Most of our clients do use Encompass. Not all, but many do. For those clients using us in Encompass, you'll have a very explicit way to see our ability to classify a document. And that is in the form of Encompass Classify. So again, we do have a product that will index your application packages that you send us and re-upload them into the E folder in Encompass based on our ability to classify all those different documents and figure out what they are. You tell us where to put them, and we place them in these different E folder buckets. Now, we are building an integration in other LOSs. Meridian Link is one that's coming up very soon. So any of our clients that use us in different LOSs, please note that our ability to classify documentation can help you in these other LOSs. So in Encompass specifically, you'll see that we figured out this is a pay stub, and here's some bank statements, and all these different buckets where these documents are located. That's what we figured out they are, and we placed them in there. Now, we have the ability to use a little bit of granularity when we index documents. Previously, I mentioned that we do a small bit of capture on many documents when we classify them, when we figure out what they are. So a pay stub is a good example. We can pull a little bit of information from the pay stub when we're figuring out what is this, and some of that information will help you know, is this borrower one's pay stub? Is it a different borrower's pay stub? Or is this pay stub from this employer or that employer? So some context for documents that you should expect sometimes on loans to get more than one version of a document. So a pay stub, again, is a really good example. And if you open the name of the attachment up here, you'll see some of those data fields that we capture. So the employer's name, the borrower's name, the pay stub date, and we'll actually use those pieces of data not just to influence the bucket that it goes into, but also the name of the file itself for each individual file. So again, we're just using paystub as an example here. Now we can use some of those data pieces off the documents. Again, I'm just going to repeat this to state or to know where to put the documents. Sometimes if maybe you want to have one person's income documents or bank statements go into one folder versus another for like kind documents, we can do that. We can use the data off the document to figure that out. And you'll see we even input some of those values in this description field in Encompass. So your users know, hey, whose pay stub is this? If you're an end user on this call, you'll know opening up this VOE folder, this is, in this case, Martha Washington's VOE. So this is what we call dynamic mapping. It's a little bit of a granular level of our ability to classify all the documents and then place them into Encompass. If you don't have this set up right now in your Encompass instance, you can reach out to your account manager. We can get this set up for you. This is a pretty common, helpful piece of our ability to classify documents. So again, just recapping some of these first pieces so far, at least specifically as it pertains to Encompass, we figure out what these documents are. We do grab a bit of detail from the documents themselves, which you can have us use to index these documents with some level of granularity and even include some of those details here in this little description box so you and anyone else on your team can see what these documents are in some of these like-kind folders. All right, that being said, that's all the happy path. That's when things go well. We know what these W-2s are, these bank statements, these tax bills, all the different things that you send us. Sometimes we get documentation that we don't support. As I mentioned before, we have a defined list of documents that we support. By nature, that means there are some things that you may send us that we don't support yet. Now, we do onboard support for new documents just about every month. Sometimes it's a dozen, sometimes it's a couple dozen. Now, that will help us reduce the number of documents that we don't know what they are. But, and I see that there's no unknown folder in this example, so I'm just going to spin one up real quick. You may see from time to time an e-folder bucket called unknown, and it would be in all caps like this unless your team has configured it to be something else. But out of the box, we have a e-folder bucket named unknown that we'll use to place those documents that we don't support processing for. So if you do see this e-folder bucket here, if it's present on any loan file you're working on in Encompass, it's good best practice. Hop in there, see what's in there. If there's something you need, then you can place it into a bucket where it belongs in the e-folder. A lot of times you may see things that are just like fax cover pages or things that you don't necessarily need or want, and they would just land in there too, so it could help with file cleanup. But there might also be a picture of a tree or a cat or a car or something like that. So anything that we don't support would go into this unknown folder. So again, only if it's there, if you get a loan file and it's not there, that just means that we supported everything, we placed it in the right folders. But if you do see that bucket, take a look. That's something that we didn't quite have a grasp on. If you need it, you can drop it into a bucket. All right, a couple other just general things here. This is Encompass specific, but I do like to share that there's an e-folder bucket. It's called Ocrolus Processing Complete. And in the event that you wanted to know what we processed, you can use this one. The analogy I always like to use is it's like the receipt when you go to a store and you get a little list of everything you got. Same concept applies here. You can see what you sent to Ocrolus or what anyone else on your team has sent to Ocrolus, and it'll help you answer the question, did Ocrolus see this or should I send this to them? Does their income calculation have this in or not? Did their conditions factor this document in or not? So you could look in this e-folder bucket just to see anything and everything that was sent to Ocrolus in the event that you need to. So again, I understand that may not be every time, but if you do need to get an answer to that question, you'll see an exact copy of what was sent to us. So this is pre-Ocrolus classification. So you may see, like in this case, Our example has just a bunch of randomly named PDFs. This would be in the format that it was given to us pre-Ocrolus classification. You may also just have one PDF that has 60 different documents in there if that's how you send it to us. That's fine. We're going to place an original copy of whatever it was you sent us in this Ocrolus processing complete folder for your reference so you can see what was sent to us. All right, let me pause. I want to do a quick check to see if there's any questions. Again, there's a Q&A part of Zoom that you're free to use, and let me find it. I don't believe I see anything in there. Nope, nothing yet. You may need to click the More button in Zoom, and then you can click Q&A, but feel free to use that as a little window to asking us any questions that you'd like. There's one final piece that I want to cover, and then we're going to keep it nice and tight under 20 minutes. But how to see where Ocrolus placed a document. Now, this again is Encompass specific, but that is helpful to know. So I'm going to actually go to our dashboard. If anyone is not sure how to get to that, you would go to Order Additional Services on the left side here in Encompass. And this will let you load up the Ocrolus dashboard. Now, whether you go here regularly, maybe to use our income worksheets or our conditions products, or maybe you don't, if maybe you don't even have those turned on in your environment, you can use the Ocrolus dashboard to see where we placed documents in the E folder. Now, this again is probably not something that you'd need to do every time, especially once you're familiar with where we place documents. But maybe you're a new user to Ocrolus. We sign up many clients, usually a couple a week. And if you're just getting used to how things are wired up for Ocrolus to index documents, you can use this index button right here on the left side. And this is going to be a place where we list all of the different documents that we've processed on the given loan file that you're in. And if you open up one of these document names, you'll see a location option right here. This location piece of information is actually the E folder bucket where we originally placed this document. So again, this would be based on the configuration that your organization used when wiring up Ocrolus. It can be changed. So if anyone sees something and we're putting it in the wrong place, please feel free to bubble that up to management, and we'll make sure they know how to change that setting. But for any of these documents in this entire index list here, these are all the different documents we've processed. And again, you can see in the location details right here, that's the E folder bucket where we place something. So you can use the search button at the top if you're looking for something and you're thinking, I know somebody said they sent this to Ocrolus and Ocrolus processed it. Well, maybe you wanted to find a pay stub and figure that out. If you type in the word pay stub, you can use this index part of our dashboard and see that location right there. And that's the E folder bucket where that document is located. All right, I'll pause again. There is a question in the Q&A, so we'll address that one. Let me see if there's any others that are flowing in. If there aren't, guys, feel free. If there's any questions, by all means, I'm happy to help answer some of your questions. But let's read this question here. So if there are documents submitted in Spanish, can it read those? So that's a good question. I don't believe we support a foreign language aside from English as the only supported language. If you have a bank statement that is from another country, but it's in English, I believe then you'll have better odds of that working. Our solutions were designed with US lending in mind. Now, we do have clients outside of the US, but I believe in those cases, the documents do still need to be in English. So if you're having some trouble with a document that's actually written in a foreign language, I believe that it would be related to that. All right, I'm going to close the dashboard while we're here. But if there are any other questions, again, please feel free to use the Q&A part in Zoom. Again, you might have to click on More to find the Q&A button in there. But I don't see any other questions coming in. So just a quick recap. Again, Ocrolus will classify documents. It's one of the very first things that we do upon receipt of them from you to us. In Encompass, the starting line for when all that starts is sending us the documents. Many times clients you'll be using the Ocrolus processing required e-folder bucket to send us documents. Other times you may have automation set up for documents, for us to pull your documents from unassigned here in File Manager. A couple different flavors that we have, but that's when we begin processing documents. Again, in Encompass, you do need to hit that save button if you're manually sending us those documents. First thing we do is identify them, figure out what all these different documents are. And we do grab a couple data fields from many of those documents, like W-2s or pay stubs. So we can use that data on those documents, the borrower's name or the bank name or the employer name on a W-2 to help index your e-folder a little bit more granularly, if that's a word. And some of that stuff, again, is very helpful just to have a nice final output within the e-folder, organized in a manner like this, where different borrower documents can be separated out by some detail off the document. And again, that's really the completion of our classification step. But if you do have some questions around where did something go or how did something get indexed into the e folder, in Encompass, you can access our dashboard here under additional services and see the location itself of where something went. I personally am a big fan of the consistency this brings, not just where things go, the e-folder bucket itself, but how things are labeled. These attachment names here, again, this is in your control. You can work with your account manager if there are some preferences that you or your team might have with how things are named or where they're placed. But that is really good consistency that anyone working on a loan file will get to benefit from when we index your loan files. All right, let me take one last peek at the Q&A just to see if there's anything else, and there is not. So hopefully I did a good job covering this. If you do have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to your account managers. We're always happy to help. Have a great week. Thanks for your time. See you next time.